Tonight, you do not need to hurry anywhere. The room you are in is simple, quiet, and kind. The air is soft against your skin. The blanket has no hidden bones in it. No steel, no whale baleen, no tiny buttons marching up your spine like a private army. Your clothes, if you happen to be wearing any at all, are probably loose, forgiving things. Cotton jersey, elastic fabric that asks nothing heroic of your ribs. And because the modern world has spoiled you in 1,000 quiet ways, you may never have had to ask one of history's stranger questions. What did it actually feel like to get dressed in Victorian England? Not just to look at the fashion plates, not just to admire the portraits and wonder at the hats and lace and polished boots, but to wake up inside that world, to stand in a chilly room before breakfast, and to place one layer after another between your body and the day until you no longer quite move like yourself. Victorian fashion was not merely stylish, it was structural, it was moral, it was theatrical, it was social language stitched into cloth. It could make a person look refined, serious, marriageable, respectable, prosperous, grieving, available, unavailable, sensible, reckless, devout, idle, or vulgar before a single word had been spoken. A sleeve could imply character, a collar could imply discipline, a bonnet could imply propriety, a stain on a hem could imply everything else, and yet, for all the elegance we remember, there was also strain. A great deal of strain. Fabric could weigh heavily, laces could pull sharply, starch could scratch, shoes could pinch, pins could stab. Perfume could cover things, but not entirely. A room might glow in candlelight, while the people inside it sat very straight and tried not to sweat. That is what makes the world of Victorian fashion so strange, and also, in its own way, so human. Because under every beautiful silhouette was a body making accommodations. A breath taken more shallowly, a step taken more carefully, a meal eaten more delicately, a feeling adjusted to match the outfit. So tonight, very gently, we are going to drift there. Not to mock too loudly, not to judge too harshly, and not to shake you awake with the sharper edges of history. Only to wander softly through that world and notice how much effort went into looking effortless, how much labor went into looking calm, and how often beauty in the 19th century was really a form of patient endurance wrapped in ribbon. As always, you can let the story do the work. There is nothing to solve, nothing to memorize, no examination waiting at the end. Only a slow walk through a stranger wardrobe, and perhaps by the time it is over, a small new gratitude for the humble miracle of being able to breathe deeply in your own bed. So let your shoulders drop a little, let the day loosen, and imagine that somewhere, far beyond the reach of electric light, in a house of heavy curtains and polished wood, morning is just beginning. The room is cold in the way old rooms often are, with a chill that seems to live inside the walls themselves. The window is tall and narrow. The drapes are weighty enough to impress a bishop. Pale daylight filters through their edges and spreads itself over a washstand. A dressing table, a small rug, and a patient line of garments laid out with the seriousness of ceremony. You wake in that room not as a visitor in a museum, but as a person expected to live a full day in this clothing. The first sound might be the creak of the bed as you sit up. The second might be the distant clatter of wheels on stone. Somewhere below, a fire is being coaxed into life. Somewhere outside, a horse is stamping. The city, or the town, is stirring itself awake. And before you can properly join it, you must dress. That verb does not mean what it means now. Now, dressing is often a blur of minutes. A shirt, over the head, a pair of trousers, socks, something practical, perhaps something lazy. A small private decision between comfort and presentation. In the Victorian world, dressing is process. It is ritual, negotiation, and engineering before breakfast. The garments laid out before you are not one outfit, but a sequence. Layers that do not simply cover the body, but edit it, support it, train it, display it, restrain it, protect it from judgment, while also exposing it to judgment from every angle. The first layer is plain enough: linen, cotton, the intimate layer meant to stand between skin and all the more demanding textiles yet to come. For a woman, a chemise, simple and soft by the standards of the time. Though soft is a relative word in an era that rarely goes fully out of its way for comfort. For a man, a shirt and underdrawers; for both, stockings that must be pulled and arranged and secured with care. Already, the body is being prepared less for pleasure than for presentation. The room is quiet, except for the rustle of cloth and the faint complaint of floorboards. Perhaps there is a basin of water so cold it persuades you to wash quickly and not philosophize. Perhaps there is a brush drawn through hair with long practiced strokes. Perhaps there is no great hurry, and yet no sense of leisure either. One does not drift unstructured into a Victorian day. One assembles for it. You glance at the heavier garments waiting their turn, and in that waiting line sits one object that seems to hold a gravity all its own. The corset. It rests there with an innocent stillness, all laces and eyelets and disciplined intent. And the most curious thing about it is that within this world it is not considered extraordinary. It is not a costume piece. It is not yet a joke for future centuries. It is simply part of how a respectable body is made visible. Before that begins, there is a last brief moment when your breathing belongs entirely to you. The room is still cool. The morning is not yet demanding. The light is thin and silver, and if you listen closely, you can almost hear the day waiting politely on the other side of the door. Then the laces are lifted. If modern people tend to think of the corset as a symbol first and a garment second, the Victorians often understood it the other way around. It was practical before it was symbolic, or at least it liked to present itself that way. Support for the figure, improvement of posture, a correct base on which the rest of the dress could sit. A method of turning soft living anatomy into a shape that fabric preferred. All of this sounds tidy enough until it becomes physical. You step into it, or around it, and feel sturdy cloth close around your waist and torso. The material is reinforced with whalebone or steel. It is not malicious. It is merely firm in its opinions. The busk at the front settles into place. The laces at the back wait for someone else's hands. Because many tasks in this world still assume that propriety and dependence are cousins. The tightening begins modestly, then less modestly. It is astonishing how quickly the body becomes aware of each tug. A small pull, a pause, another. The sensation is not only pressure, it is instruction. Stand this way, hold here, do not soften there. A corset does not merely squeeze, it suggests a philosophy. The spine rises, the shoulders settle back, the waist is asked to narrow its claims upon space. And because this is mourning, and because people must turn such routines into normal life somehow, the process is carried out with the calm face of custom. Perhaps a mother does it, perhaps a maid, perhaps a practiced pair of hands that know exactly how much to pull before decorum becomes dizziness. There may even be small conversation while your middle is being negotiated into social acceptability. Weather, letters, the quality of the bread. One of history's quieter miracles is the human ability to speak casually while under absurd conditions. When at last the laces are finished, you are not exactly in pain, or not in a way the century would dignify as pain. You are simply aware now of limits. Your full breath has become a little ceremonial. Your posture is no longer a choice. Bending must be considered in advance. A sneeze might become a strategic event. Breakfast will be approached with respect. And yet there is also a strange stillness after the effort. The body, once arranged, becomes calm in a newly disciplined way. The silhouette has been secured. The uncertainty of softness has been exchanged for a firmer line. Victorian fashion loved this transformation because it implied self-command. To look arranged, was to look morally arranged. To appear unsupported by chance or flesh was to seem governed by character. That, perhaps, is one of the deeper truths hidden in the corset. It did not only shape the waist, it shaped conduct, or at least the appearance of conduct. It changed how a person entered a room, sat in a chair, leaned over a table, turned to speak, accepted a cup, mounted a stair, endured a sermon, laughed, coughed, and ate. A body once laced had to move with forethought, and forethought itself had social value. The room grows quieter after all that tugging. The laces are tied off. The mourning does not applaud. It simply continues outside. A carriage passes inside. The next layer waits, and that next layer, in its own way, is less about pressure than space. Because now, the dress begins to move outward. The crinoline arrives like an idea from architecture that wandered accidentally into fashion and found no one willing to stop it. Light metal hoops or earlier, more cumbersome supports create the expanding bell beneath the skirt. To look at it before it is covered is to wonder whether a person is being dressed or installed. But once it is on, the logic becomes unmistakable. Width means presence, volume means luxury, space around the body becomes social evidence. There is something almost serene about the first moment. The hoops settle into shape. They hold themselves. They create air. After the close persuasion of the corset, the widening of the skirt can feel oddly freeing, though freedom, in this case, has strict geometry. The body has room in one direction by surrendering ease in several others. One may occupy more space and command more notice, while becoming far less able to pass through a doorway without planning. Over the framework come the petticoats. One is understandable. Two are commitment. By the third and fourth, fashion becomes weather. Cotton, flannel, muslin, perhaps wool in colder months. Each layer adds softness to the silhouette and friction to the experience. The rustle begins. The weight gathers. A pleasant visual fullness is achieved by increasingly unromantic means. And because these layers protect modesty, shape movement, smooth the cage beneath, and contribute to warmth in drafty houses, they are not entirely irrational. They are just very nearly too much. Victorian clothing often lives in that territory. Not useless, not senseless, simply carried to such elaborate ends that the body must surrender more than modern people would bargain away. You stand there while the petticoats settle around your legs, like soft insistence. The sensation is at once cushioned and cumbersome. Your feet become distant acquaintances. The floor can still be felt, but through fabric, through swish, through the quiet suggestion that you are no longer built for haste. And then the dress itself, or the bodice and skirt arranged together, begins to turn all these hidden mechanics into visible grace. The bodice is fitted closely, because looseness in the wrong place implies slackness of a more spiritual kind. Buttons or hooks must be fastened, sleeves drawn correctly, neckline adjusted according to time of day, age, status, and event. The Victorians did not merely wear clothes, they tuned them like instruments until the social note was correct. From the outside, the effect is elegant, composed, almost natural, if one has been taught since childhood to see it as such. From the inside, the effect is more complicated. One is held together, yes, but also held in. Even sitting becomes an arrangement rather than an impulse. Leaning is limited. Reaching must be considered. Turning too briskly risks tangling something unseen. Still, once the layers have settled, something curious happens. The body begins to listen to the rhythm imposed upon it. The rustle of petticoats becomes steady, almost soothing. The slight sway of fabric around the ankles is repetitive. The very restrictions that would exasperate a modern afternoon might, in the quiet of an old room, create a slow awareness of motion. No sudden movements, no careless folding of the body, no flinging oneself across a chair. Everything becomes deliberate, and deliberate movement, when drained of urgency, can start to resemble ceremony. This is why Victorian fashion remained so fascinating. It punished spontaneity but rewarded performance, and human beings are often willing to suffer a surprising amount when the suffering makes them legible, admired, or safe. The mirror now shows not a pile of layers, but a silhouette, a waist drawn inward, a skirt expanded outward, a balance struck between discipline and display. All that remains is to complicate it further, for fashion is rarely satisfied with one impossible shape when it can invent another. By the later decades of the century, the vast circular spread of the crinoline gives way to a newer arrangement of volume. The bustle gathers the skirt behind you, lifting fabric at the back into folds and swells and draped intentions. If the earlier silhouette made a woman resemble a moving pavilion, the bustle suggests that elegance has chosen to lean backward and become decorative weather. The practical experience of this innovation is less poetic. You discover quickly that the body now enters a room in stages. First the front, then the rest. Chairs become negotiations. Leaning back becomes at best unwise. The whole business requires a new awareness of furniture. Fireplace screens, narrow passages, and any innocent object unfortunate enough to occupy the region just behind your dignity. And yet this shape, too, has its logic within the culture that loved it. Fashion does not seek stillness. It seeks renewed distinction. Once one form becomes common, another must rise to replace it. A trained eye sees in the bustle not only prettiness, but timeliness. One is not merely dressed, one is current. There is a peculiar effort involved in keeping up with changing ideals, when each ideal requires new physical habits. The body must keep learning the century's latest opinion of what beauty means. First broadness, then backward fullness, first one mode of balance, then another. The modern closet may ask people to buy new things. The Victorian wardrobe often asks them to inhabit new mechanics of self. At last, with bodice, skirt, underlayers, and all the concealed framework of correctness in place, there comes a pause. You lower yourself carefully toward a chair, not fully, only enough to feel where the dress allows rest. The room has gone calm again. The hardest part of the morning is behind you, though the day has scarcely begun. A little quiet settles, the hems are adjusted, the hands rest. Somewhere in the house a door closes softly, and for a moment, before the next obligations arrive, the entire construction simply breathes with you. Or rather, it permits the smaller, measured breath it has left you. Across the hall, another kind of dressing is taking place. Victorian men are often remembered as more practical, and in certain broad ways they were. Their clothes did not ask the same elaborate architecture of space. No crinolines flared around them, no bustles announced themselves from across a drawing room. But to interpret this as comfort would be generous. Male fashion in the 19th century was a discipline of stiffness, polish, and relentless correctness. A gentleman begins with the razor. Even facial hair, when worn, is not exempt from management. Sideburns, whiskers, moustaches, beards, these too have fashions. Edges, degrees of fullness, and silent statements to make. The mirror is not a friend so much as an auditor. It asks whether the face has been shaped into seriousness, whether the hair has been persuaded into order, whether the entire head presents itself as reliable. Cold water, soap, a brush, pomade with the faintly overcommitted scent of fat and ambition. Hair is smoothed and parted with the sort of care modern people reserve for legal signatures. A gentleman of the era may value natural ease in theory, but his grooming routine does not trust nature nearly enough to leave it alone. Then comes the collar. If there is a single object capable of proving that discomfort can masquerade as dignity, it may be the starched Victorian collar. It rises around the neck with a crisp authority that allows little slouching and less forgetfulness. One does not lounge convincingly in such a thing. One remains aware of one's throat, one's jawline, one's posture, and possibly one's mortality. The cravat or tie follows, and with it, a curious moment in which fabric at the neck becomes almost moral in significance. Tied correctly, it suggests order. Tied carelessly, it suggests looseness of character or temperament. Men's fashion in this century often pretended not to be vain while investing extraordinary energy in appearing precisely unvain in the approved manner. Shirt, waistcoat, trousers high enough to imply that the natural waist is a negotiable concept. Then coat, frock coat, morning coat, evening coat, according to hour and purpose. Each garment participates in making the male body look upright, contained, and administratively competent. A Victorian gentleman should appear able to keep his emotions filed and his accounts balanced. Clothing assists the impression, and here too there is hidden discomfort. Trousers pull, waistcoats warm the torso, coats restrict the arm just enough to encourage measured gestures. Shoes highly polished and not especially forgiving wait near the bed like leather arguments. By the time everything is buttoned, fitted, brushed, and adjusted, the masculine ideal has become a silhouette of restraint. There is no corset here in the obvious sense, but there is still constriction. Not of shape in the same dramatic hourglass style, but of movement, ease, spontaneity, and visible softness. A man may breathe more freely than his wife or sister, but he must still present himself as composed, controlled, and untouched by disorder. That too takes labor, when he finally lifts his pocket watch and settles it into place, when the coat skirts fall correctly, when the cuffs show just enough. There is the same brief satisfaction found in the women's dressing ritual. The self has been prepared for witnesses. The day can now begin judging. Of course, before anyone sees your hands, your feet, or the exact angle at which you stand, they often see your hat. In Victorian society, hats are not decorative afterthoughts. They are social punctuation. They finish the sentence of the body. They announce respectability before the mouth opens. To appear bareheaded in the wrong setting is not simply to look unfinished, but to look as though one has neglected the grammar of public life. For men, the top hat rises like a polished declaration. Height itself has social charm. A tall hat extends not only the figure, but the authority of the figure. Silk gleams, brims shine. A man tipping such a hat does not merely greet you. He performs the correct degree of recognition of the correct angle. And the hat makes this possible in a way his eyebrows alone never could. For women, the bonnet or hat creates an entirely different world of complications. Ribbon, velvet, straw, silk, lace, flowers, feathers, perhaps enough decorative confidence to suggest that one has incorporated a small and tasteful section of the natural world above the forehead. Some hats shade, some frame, some obscure, some imply maidenhood, widowhood, taste, wealth, or catastrophic sincerity. And then there are the pins. Long hat-pins slide through layers of trimming and hair to hold these constructions in place. It is comforting to know that elegance so often depends upon disguised metal spikes. A woman may step delicately into church or a carriage while carrying, inches from her temple, an object capable of making the entire enterprise feel faintly martial. The practical problem with very large or elaborate headwear is that society continues to insist upon doors, pews, parlors, and other people. The hat must travel through space without knocking over dignity, candles, cousins, or ecclesiastical furniture. Turning one's head becomes an act of diplomacy. Passing another well-dressed woman in a narrow hall may require tiny adjustments as intricate as dancing. Yet the hat also offers something lovely: shade, frame, secrecy. A lowered brim softens the world. Light filters differently beneath it. The face feels partly sheltered from being read too quickly. In a society obsessed with appearance, headwear can be both exposure and refuge. Stand outside for a moment under such a brim, and the street becomes a gentler picture. Brightness softens, edges dim, the noise of wheels and voices seems held a little farther away. Even in a highly performative culture, people still found ways to make objects do double duty as comfort. Hands, however, are less easily comforted. Gloves are expected. Gloves for calling, gloves for walking, gloves for church, gloves for dinner, gloves for the public management of one's person. The bare hand belongs too much to labor, to skin, to directness. The gloved hand belongs to society. It may greet, receive, hold, indicate, and decline while remaining slightly abstracted from the flesh underneath. There is something undeniably graceful about a fine glove when seen from a distance. The line of the fingers becomes neater. The hand takes on a finished elegance, but at close range the truth returns. Gloves must fit tightly to look correct. Buttons resist. Leather protests. Silk betrays fragility. Once on, the fingers lose a measure of skill. The hand can no longer do ordinary things without a small layer of ceremony between intention and action. To fasten a tiny clasp, to sort a ribbon, to retrieve some object, fallen awkwardly to the floor, everything becomes just a little less direct. Shoes continue the lesson. Victorian footwear is less interested in kindness than in line. Narrow boots, polished boots, heeled boots, shoes buttoned and laced with exacting patience, all suggesting that a foot ought to serve the appearance of the body before it serves the comfort of the person inside it. The first minutes may not seem too terrible. Then walking begins, then stairs, then pavements, then standing in a parlor, while conversation extends beyond the natural goodwill of the toes. A proper shoe speaks a language of finish. It gleams. It reassures observers that one is not careless. It also slowly reminds the wearer that the body has been subordinated to leather and expectation. This is especially true outdoors, where the city immediately demonstrates its hostility to polished surfaces. Mud, damp, horse droppings, uneven stones, the occasional puddle whose exact contents are better left undiscussed. Such realities do not care how carefully your boots were brushed. A hem darkens, a heel slips, a soul grows weary. By now the body has been fully socialized. Torso arranged, head framed, hands covered, feet enclosed. And what remains to be managed is everything the face and hair might accidentally reveal. Hair in the Victorian period can become an entire mourning in itself. For women, it may be parted, brushed, braided, looped, pinned, curled, arranged upward, outward, backward, with enough practical intelligence and enough hidden hardware to suggest that architecture was a respectable hobby among ladies. Hairpieces and switches quietly assist nature, where nature has been judged insufficiently abundant. Pins disappear into coils, combs hold shape, ribbons or jeweled details wait for evenings and invitations. The aim is not wild beauty, it is composed beauty. Hair should look intentional, even when the intention is to appear soft and modest. One must look as though the style simply settled this way from a combination of grace and breeding, never from an hour with aching arms and a mouthful of pins. Men again pursue order rather than ornament, but order itself can become a kind of ornament. Pomade shines, side parts remain exact. Facial hair is trained to imply maturity without wildness. The whole head is persuaded to look as though it belongs to a person who can keep household accounts, political opinions, and emotional weather under excellent control. Then the face, the Victorian beauty ideal, especially for women, admires paleness in ways that modern skincare would find alarming. To be pale is to be protected from labor and from sun. It suggests interiority, refinement, gentility, a life unspoiled by outdoor necessity. This desire for pallor leads toward powders, washes, and remedies that range from merely futile to quietly poisonous. Rouge must be discreet if used at all. Color on the face is a dangerous game, not because color is unattractive, but because visible effort in beauty risks moral interpretation. Too much obvious adornment, and one slides from elegant to suspect. The ideal woman is meant to look beautiful, without having visibly intended the result too strongly. This, of course, is impossible, so an entire ritual evolves around making labor disappear. Powders are dabbed, lips are touched lightly, brows may be darkened. Skin is prepared in private because the finished illusion should arrive in public without the machinery that created it. The whole business resembles a theatrical production in which the audience must never be allowed backstage. Perfume enters where water and ventilation fail. Victorian houses, streets, clothes, and bodies occupy a world that does not smell consistently pleasant. Coal smoke, damp wool, horse traffic, packed cities, limited bathing, stored food, close rooms, flowers, polish, starch, candle wax, wet leather, lavender sachets, rose water, old wood, everything mingles. Perfume does not erase reality. It edits it, a little scent at the wrist, a little at the handkerchief, perhaps tucked into drawers, sewn into sachets, dabbed behind ears, caught faintly in fabric. One can imagine rooms that smelled simultaneously floral and exhausted, graceful and crowded, delicate and overdetermined, and there is something very drowsy about that imagined mixture. Curtains holding scent from many days, a shawl carrying a faint trace of violets, powder dust on a dressing table, the late morning light, no longer silver now, but cream-colored and warmer, resting against glass bottles, and a brush with a carved handle. The body is ready, the face is ready, the hair is ready. Now the rules begin. The Victorians do not only care what you wear, they care when you wear it, why you wear it, and whether the hour agrees with your sleeves. Morning has its own dress, afternoon another, evening another still. There are clothes appropriate for walking, calling, riding, church-going, shopping, dining, mourning, seaside air, country visits, convalescence, and the subtle art of being seen without seeming to desire being seen too much. The wardrobe does not merely accompany the day, it divides it. This is one reason 19th-century fashion feels so immense. It is not only a set of garments but a system of time. One changes not because something became dirty or uncomfortable or boring, but because the social grammar of noon differs from the social grammar of dusk. A morning dress should often be quieter. An afternoon visit might permit a little more display. Evening invites richer fabrics, lower necklines in formal company, greater polish, more deliberate elegance. Men too shift according to occasion, though with fewer frills and no less seriousness. The wrong coat at the wrong hour can imply not merely carelessness, but ignorance of the world one claims to belong to. This means that every public appearance becomes an act of reading and being read. An elderly aunt may note a cuff, a neighbor may note a ribbon, a servant may note your hem, and know immediately how long it has been since the street had the chance to speak to it. A widow in improper shade may stir comment. A young woman too bright too early in the day may seem overeager. A gentleman insufficiently formal, by evening, risks looking unfinished, as though he has failed to arrive completely as himself. Clothing becomes text, and everyone has learned, in one degree or another, to read it. By now you can feel how tiring that must be, not dramatic fatigue, not the fatigue of a chase or a battle, the more delicate fatigue of constant adjustment, sitting correctly, holding the hands correctly, entering correctly, choosing correctly, remaining, all day long, within the outline of respectability, while hidden laces, pins, soles, and seams go on making their quiet demands. So before we step outside, let the pace soften again. Imagine a pause in a front room, a chair near a window, a little table, perhaps tea not yet poured, but promised, a pocket of silence in which the body, fully dressed, is allowed simply to exist for a minute without anyone asking it to turn. Walk, bow, visit, dance, or endure. The fabric settles around you, the house breathes, and then the door opens onto the street. Victorian streets do not admire your outfit enough to spare it. The first thing the outside world offers is unpredictability. Stone underfoot is uneven, mud waits where stone fails, wheels pass, horses leave evidence, shops spill goods and signs into narrow space. Newsboys, vendors, servants, clerks, governesses, delivery carts, respectable ladies, errand children, and men with somewhere urgent to be all inhabit the same moving corridor. To walk through such a street while dressed in the full language of propriety is a test of concentration. For a woman, skirts gather dust and damp at the lower edge no matter how politely she lifts them. For a man, polished boots surrender their shine to practical life at an almost insulting speed. If rain has fallen, one must pick a path with care, and then accept that care is rarely enough. The century loved ideals, but the streets loved mud. And walking is never purely walking, because public movement is also visibility. Who accompanies you matters, whether you walk alone matters. How fast you walk matters, where you look matters. Too much confidence may invite comment. Too much hesitation may also invite comment. The Victorians were ingenious in creating worlds where opposite behaviors could each be judged incorrect depending upon who was watching. Calling upon a friend or acquaintance intensifies the performance. One does not simply appear, one leaves a card, requests the possibility of an appearance, offers one's name through paper first, body second, ... Even friendship may be routed through etiquette before being granted the kindness of spontaneity. A servant receives the card, a tray may be involved, a pause follows. The household decides whether it is socially alive to you at this exact moment. There is comedy in this, certainly, but also a revealing sort of caution. Victorian society often prefers form because form creates distance, and distance creates safety. A great many rules are really just fences built out of manners. This is true for romance as well. A glove returned, a parasol briefly held, a walking pace adjusted. A proper introduction arranged. Such tiny acts carry weight because the culture compresses feeling into formal containers. Clothing helps hold those containers in shape. You cannot fling yourself impulsively into life when your boots, stays, sleeves, and elders all discourage the attempt. Yet human beings remain human. Children wriggle out of neatness as soon as they can. Boys in tiny suits and girls in little layers discover mud with democratic enthusiasm. Ribbons loosen, shoes are lost, braids slant, aprons bear evidence of life. One of the gentlest truths in any strict period is that childhood keeps trying to reintroduce the body to freedom, and the weather itself becomes a great critic of fashion. Summer does not care for wool, winter does not much respect decorative elegance either. In heat, the layers that indicated status become a private climate one must endure with grace. Collars wilt against the neck, corsets trap warmth, gloves become earnest little ovens for the hands. Bonnets shade the face but not the lungs. A parlor with still air and too many people in proper dress may become an education in silent suffering. In winter, things turn another way. Houses are drafty. Fires are selective. Corridors remain cold. Boots may harden. Fingers ache. Dressing in many layers does at least provide insulation. But one pays for warmth with heaviness. The body moves under wool and lining and winter accessories like a respectable parcel. The Victorians, so often caricatured for vanity, were in truth also endurance, athletes of presentation. Even this, however, is only the visible side of the story. Because once a garment has been worn in streets and parlors and weather, once the hem has met mud, and the collar has met skin, and the glove has met everything a glove should not meet, another labor begins. The labor that keeps elegance from collapsing under its own dirt. Laundry day, in a Victorian household, is one of those hidden engines of the century. Without it, all the lovely surfaces would darken, sour, sag, and fail. With it, someone gives entire portions of life to restoring cloth, so that society may continue pretending beauty arrives naturally. The process begins not with poetry, but with basins, water carried, soap prepared, items sorted, linen apart from colors, finer things apart from sturdier things, white pieces judged with a severity usually reserved for moral crises. What the public reads as Christmas has to be manufactured through soaking, rubbing, scrubbing, wringing, boiling, rinsing, drying, starching, and ironing. Imagine hands in cold water early in the day. Imagine the roughness of soap, the scraping insistence of a board, steam from pots used to whiten fabric until the room itself feels damp with labor. Imagine petticoats hung in rows, shirts flapping, stockings draped, collars waiting for starch, irons heating near the fire with all the gentle menace of metal that will scorch if one misjudges a second. There is something humbling in remembering that fashionable clothing was not simply purchased and worn. It had to be maintained through backache and raw fingers. Behind every respectable cuff, there may be another person's whole afternoon. This hidden labor softens the comedy of Victorian dress. One can laugh at the absurdity of 20 buttons, but someone fastened them, scrubbed them, replaced them, pressed the placket they belonged to, and folded the garment for its next appearance. Fashion, in every age, rests partly upon invisible work. The 19th century simply gave that work more fabric to wrestle. Late afternoon light on drying linen is perhaps one of the century's gentler pictures. A line across a garden, clean cloth moving lightly, the house quieter now, some tasks completed, some not, a smell of soap and sun and steam, and old cotton cooling. In such moments, even labor can become calm. Not every fabric, however, carries only ordinary wear. Some carry hazard. Victorian love of vivid color produced garments of astonishing beauty and occasional toxicity. Bright greens especially became fashionable through pigments that contained arsenic, turning a color associated with freshness and life into something that could irritate skin, trouble lungs, and haunt dressmakers far more intimately than the elegant wearer might ever know. There's a chilling contrast in the thought of it, a gown glowing brilliantly in gaslight, silk catching the eye, compliments gathering, all the while chemistry sits invisibly in the threads, indifferent to admiration. Even when danger was not dramatic, it was present in the broader culture of materials. Dyes, powders, cleaning compounds, cosmetics, and poorly ventilated interiors all collaborated in making refinement a little less innocent than the portraits suggest. Then there is mourning. If bright arsenic green represents fashion's appetite for brilliance, mourning black reveals its appetite for control. Grief in Victorian society often had a wardrobe as strict as any military code. Matte black fabrics, veils, jet jewelry, reduced social life. A body dressed not only to feel sorrow, but to display it legibly and for the correct duration. There is something both moving and unsettling in such clothing. On one hand, mourning attire gives grief visible form. It says to the world, this person carries a loss, and life has changed around that fact. On the other hand, when grief becomes highly regulated, performance can creep close beside feeling. One must sorrow in correct fabric, one must dim oneself publicly on schedule, and yet in the hush of a morning room, with black crepe absorbing light and footsteps softened by carpets and habit, the atmosphere can become almost monastic. Stripped of bright ornament, fashion shows another side of itself. Quiet, wait, ritual. The body again arranged, but now in service to absence rather than display. This too belongs to the story of Victorian dress. Clothing did not only celebrate life, courtship, youth, and status. It accompanied death. It translated bereavement into silhouette. It let society see, from across a room, that joy was not currently proper here. As daylight wanes, public life gathers once more toward its more formal versions of itself. Evenings bring dinner, visits, music, perhaps a dance, perhaps a gathering in which everyone has dressed, not only to be comfortable, certainly not that, but to signify that the day's common business has given way to social theatre. The ballroom, when it appears, is all gleam and management. Light in mirrors, gloved hands correct distances, skirts trained to move through crowded space. Coats cut for elegance more than freedom. The dance itself may look airy from the edge of the room, but the people inside it know the truth. A turn must be judged, a hem must clear the floor, a foot must land where the shoe can trust it. Breath must remain composed, expression must remain pleasant. To dance beautifully under such conditions is not nothing. And then, outside the ballroom or in daylight hours, there is the parasol, which may seem a small and almost frivolous accessory until one realizes how much Victorian life loved putting meaning into the hand. A parasol shades the face, preserves pallor, marks leisure, gives the arm a posture, and offers a little portable architecture against the world. It also grants a person something to do with the body while being watched. That may be one of fashion's quietest gifts. Not comfort, not exactly, but choreography. When social life becomes dense with observation, objects help the body know where to go. A fan opens, a glove is adjusted, a parasol tilts, a hat is touched, a skirt is lifted a careful inch from mud. A gentleman checks his watch, a widow lowers her veil, a child fidgets and is gently corrected, a maid fastens one last hook, a laundress irons one last cuff. A dressmaker breathes in dye and silence, a woman sits on the edge of a chair because the bustle forbids forgetting. A man stands straighter than he feels because the collar insists. And through all of it, the century goes on calling this normal. Perhaps that is the strangest part, not that Victorian fashion was complicated. Human beings have always made clothing complicated when clothing begins carrying too much social meaning. Not that it was uncomfortable. Many periods have demanded discomfort in exchange for distinction. The strangest part is how thoroughly all these burdens became ordinary. People courted, worked, grieved, dined, worshipped, strolled, visited, sweated, shivered, scrubbed and dreamed inside these arrangements of cloth and rule, until the arrangements themselves felt less like choices than like weather. And now the day begins to dim. The candles are lower. The room is quieter. The body, after so many hours of management, has started to long for release. One by one, the visible signs of the day may come away. At first, perhaps, pins carefully removed, gloves eased from the fingers, shoes abandoned with gratitude, hair loosened, combed down, shaken free of its discipline. Then hooks, buttons, tapes, layers, fabric descending, structure softening. The private self, if not fully recovered, at least returning from its long public impersonation. This undressing may be the truest luxury the century allows. And yet even here there is tenderness to be found. The Victorians were not fools in fancy clothes. They were people living within a system of meaning they had inherited, admired, feared, and enforced. They wanted to look right, because looking right promised safety, belonging, admiration, seriousness, a future. Their garments could be absurd, yes, but also deeply sincere. Clothing mattered because other people mattered. Society mattered. Appearances were not superficial when appearances affected marriage. Work, respect, and one's place inside a very observant world. So the day recedes, the mirror darkens, the last ribbon is untied. The room grows private again, and little by little, the whole strange pageant of the Victorian wardrobe begins to feel less like a gallery of bizarre objects, and more like a long effort to negotiate the distance between body and society. That is the hidden loop beneath all the details, not just corsets and hats, not just mud and mourning crepe, but the old human wish to become readable, acceptable, admirable, and safe by arranging the outer self with enormous care. History returns to this again and again. Every era has its version. Every age invents some discomfort it calls normal, Some display it calls natural. Some labor it hides behind the finished look. That is the quiet reason stories like this linger in the mind. We are laughing at the Victorians a little, yes, but we are also recognizing them. Now, though, you can leave them there. Leave the tight laces in their drawer. Leave the hatpins in the velvet cushion. Leave the boots by the hearth. Leave the parasol folded in the stand. Leave the collar on its careful shelf. Leave the black crepe sleeping in the wardrobe, and the green silk glowing faintly in memory. Return instead to your own room, to your own easy breathing, to the softness that asks nothing formal of you. Maybe your blanket is plain. Maybe your clothes are loose and unremarkable. Maybe no one would paint your portrait in them. But that is part of the blessing. Nothing in your room tonight requires poise. Nothing asks you to sit at the edge of a chair for the sake of shape. Nothing will gossip if you loosen your posture. No aunt will object to your sleeves. No servant will assess your calling card. No puddle waits to instruct your hem in humility before breakfast. You are allowed to be simple, and simplicity, history reminds us, is often a form of luxury that only becomes visible when another age has done without it. So if you feel gratitude now for elastic waistbands, for breathable fabric, for shoes made with mercy, for soap that does not bite, for water from a tap, for a world in which most people are not required to declare their moral worth through the engineering of sleeves, that gratitude is well earned. But let it stay soft. There is no need to end on triumph, only on gentleness. The Victorians, for all their stiffness, their rules, their fumes, their starch, their earnest silhouettes and their dangerous dyes, were still people trying to live beautifully inside the terms their century offered them. That is tender, in its own way, a little tragic at times, a little comic, a little admirable, very human. And now the lamps are lower still. The story has loosened. The room around you is quiet. You do not need a maid to untie your breathing. You do not need to remove 6 layers before sleep can begin. You do not need to remember which dress belongs to which hour. You can simply rest. Let the old house go dim. Let the polished wood fade. Let the mirror darken completely. Let the rustle of petticoats drift farther away, softer and softer, until it is only the sound of fabric somewhere in another century, settling at last into stillness. And if, as you drift, you happen to picture a bonnet placed carefully on a stand, or a pair of gloves folded beside a lamp, or a line of clean linen moving once in late light before the evening cooled, but you can let that image stay for a moment and then blur. Nothing here needs a final answer. Nothing needs to be buttoned closed. The day is over, the century is receding, and your own breath, easy and unstructured, can take it from here.